The Kaminoan cloning program created a military force optimized for rapid deployment rather than long-term survivability. From a structural perspective, the clone's biological design prioritized accelerated maturation to meet the Republic's immediate wartime demands. This process produced adults capable of combat within a decade, but it also ensured significantly shortened lifespans. Analysis of growth acceleration technology indicates that such methods cause long-term cellular degradation, resulting in premature aging and decreased longevity. The decision to implement accelerated aging reflects the Republic's prioritization of tactical expedience over ethical considerations. Senate records and Kaminoan production logs demonstrate that the accelerated growth cycle was not biologically necessary, but strategically desirable. A rapidly replenishable force allowed the Republic to maintain consistent troop strength without investing in multi-generational support systems. This structural choice establishes that the clones were engineered as temporary assets rather than sustainable participants in galactic society. Behavioral programming further restricted clone autonomy. Training documentation reveals that clones underwent intensive conditioning to promote obedience, risk tolerance, and suppressive emotional management. These traits ensured high battlefield reliability but limited individual agency. Such conditioning aligns with known practices in engineered military populations, where psychological uniformity is prioritized over personal development. The clone's behavioral profile was therefore not a byproduct of upbringing, but a designed feature intended to support military hierarchy. The inclusion of inhibitor chips solidified systemic control. Technical specifications recovered from Kaminoan archives identify the chips as biological regulators, capable of overriding conscious decision-making. Although the chips were justified to mitigate potential aggression, they contained latent protocols, including Order 66, that were undisclosed to the Jedi. This indicates premeditated design for future political manipulation. The chips ensured that clones remained dependent on external command structures and eliminated the possibility of organized dissent. Each clone's identity markers, such as names, armor customization, and unit traditions, emerged as adaptive responses to systemic homogenization. These practices constituted expressions of individuality within a framework engineered to restrict it. Comparative analyses with non-accelerated soldiers show that such personalization patterns occur most frequently in groups facing identity suppression. Clones established these practices to compensate for the absence of developmental autonomy, not because the system encouraged unique identity formation. Clone lifecycle planning documents demonstrate that no provisions existed for post-war integration. There were no retirement protocols, long-term medical programs, or civilian reintegration pathways. This absence reflects the Republic's underlying assumption that clones would serve exclusively in wartime and hold no role in peacetime society. Such structural omission indicates that the clones' purpose was limited to their operational lifespan, with no institutional expectation of long-term survival. Kaminoan pedagogical methods emphasized tactical efficiency over general education. Training curricula prioritized military skills, navigation, and weapon systems, while deprioritizing critical reasoning, diplomacy, or civic knowledge. This educational model produced soldiers optimized for narrow military tasks, but ill-prepared for non-combat roles. Consequently, their usefulness to the Republic outside of wartime was systematically minimized. Physical design constraints further contributed to reduced longevity. Accelerated growth increased metabolic stress, which led to early-onset joint issues, immune deficiencies, and muscular degradation. Medical assessments from the Grand Army of the Republic consistently noted these conditions. Despite this, no large-scale program was implemented to mitigate these biological consequences. This neglect demonstrates that the Republic accepted accelerated deterioration as an acceptable operational cost. The clone's legal status reveals additional structural limitations. Senate documentation consistently classified clones as military property rather than sovereign individuals. This classification allowed the Republic to employ them without consent, restrict movement, and enforce absolute subordination. The absence of legal personhood precluded the clones from seeking redress, negotiating rights, or altering their assigned roles. The economic structure surrounding the Kaminoan contract demonstrates that cost efficiency influenced all stages of clone development. Shortened lifespans reduced long-term care expenses. Genetic uniformity simplified equipment manufacturing. Standardized training reduced instructional overhead. These factors indicate that the clone's design served a fiscal model rather than an ethical or humanitarian framework. Deployment patterns confirm that clones were treated as fully expendable assets. They were consistently sent into high-risk engagements with limited reinforcement or long-term planning. Mortality reports show casualty rates that far exceeded those of non-clone battalions. This trend aligns with a force designed to absorb losses rather than maintain multi-decade operational stability. The absence of reproductive capability further limited potential continuity. Clones were sterilized as part of Kaminoan design protocols, eliminating any possibility of generational lineage. From a sociological standpoint, this prevented the development of clone-descended communities or cultural persistence. Their population was entirely dependent on continued production, reinforcing their status as manufactured military resources. Structural were assessment of clone barracks and living conditions reveals an environment optimized for operational readiness rather than personal development. Facilities emphasized efficiency, rapid deployment, and uniform discipline. Recreational, educational, and psychological support structures were minimal. This contributed to a system in which clones' lives centered exclusively on mission preparation and execution. The Republic's reliance on clones created a closed-loop dependency. As the war escalated, political leaders grew increasingly dependent on rapid troop replenishment. The absence of alternative recruitment programs demonstrates an implicit expectation that clones would remain the primary military labor force indefinitely, yet their shortened lifespans guaranteed eventual depletion without replacement, creating a structurally unsustainable system. No institutional mechanism existed to evaluate the ethical implications of cloning. The Jedi Council never conducted a formal inquiry into the moral status of the clones, and the Senate showed no interest in regulating the program. This lack of oversight allowed the system to operate without accountability and reinforced the notion that the clones' lives were defined strictly by military function. In aggregate, the Republic's structural decisions reveal that the clone army was conceived as a temporary wartime instrument rather than a population of long-term individuals. Every aspect of their design, training, legal status, and deployment reflected priorities that precluded extended survival or autonomy. The clone army was therefore doomed from inception, as their biology, social identity, and institutional context ensured a predetermined trajectory toward obsolescence and dissolution. The structural vulnerabilities of the clone program originated within the Republic rather than the Empire. When the Senate accepted an unrequested army produced by an external contractor, it implicitly endorsed the ethical premise that artificially engineered humans were permissible instruments of state power. This precedent established a framework in which clones could be deployed, replaced, or terminated without political opposition. Canon material in Attack of the Clones confirms that few senators raised objections, indicating that institutional safeguards for clone welfare were absent from the program's inception. The Republic's reliance on the inhibitor chip system further ensured that the clones' obedience superseded their autonomy. The Clone Wars reveals through Five's investigation that the chips were implanted during fetal development, predating Palpatine's direct influence. This means the Republic sanctioned a military force with embedded neurological controls long before the Empire exploited them. The ethical implications are evident. The Republic authorized a military system that circumvented informed consent and removed the possibility of dissent. Order 66 functioned as a program directive, not a voluntary betrayal. Canon episodes such as The Jedi Who Knew Too Much and Conspiracy emphasized that the clones' loyalty to the Jedi was genuine until the moment the chip activated. Their sudden behavioral reversal indicates a mechanistic compulsion. This distinction matters because it relocates responsibility from the individuals who executed the order to the political and institutional structures that embedded the command within their biology. After the transition from Republic to Empire, the accelerated aging factor became a logistical liability. The Bad Batch confirms that clones age at twice the rate of baseline humans, making long-term deployment impractical. This constraint was not an imperial policy, but a Kaminoan design approved under the Republic's contract. The Empire inherited a force that was already aging out of operational viability, rendering decommissioning an economically predictable outcome. Clone individuality, depicted throughout the Clone Wars, created an additional conflict with Imperial doctrine. Clones developed names, personal markings, and unit cultures. While these traits improved cohesion during the Republic era, they clashed with the Empire's preference for uniformity and anonymity, later embodied in the Stormtrooper program. The Republic unintentionally fostered a military identity that the Empire found incompatible with its control-focused ideology. Imperial phase-outs of clones therefore reflected systemic incompatibilities rather than sudden cruelty. Episodes of The Bad Batch show clones reassigned to remote outposts or placed into retirement facilities. These outcomes demonstrate that their obsolescence was embedded in the initial design parameters rather than created by the Empire. From the Empire's perspective, phasing out clones was a matter of strategic alignment, not moral re-evaluation. The Republic also failed to establish post-war integration structures. No pensions, rehabilitation programs, or civilian reintegration policies were created before the Clone Wars ended. Canon shows that the Senate operated under the assumption that clones' usefulness was confined to wartime conditions. This absence of planning reveals a structural negligence that persisted regardless of governmental transition. The Kaminoan production model further contributed to the clones' predetermined fate. By restricting genetic material and controlling clone modification, the Kaminoans limited their capacity for long-term independence. Their reliance on Kaminoan oversight for medical treatment, growth acceleration, and chip management ensured that clones could not maintain themselves without external support. The Republic accepted this dependency without demanding alternative care systems. With the rise of the Imperial military draft, clones lost their political value. Rebels references wider conscription initiatives, demonstrating that the Empire preferred a broad recruitment base over reliance on a single engineered population. This transition was feasible only because the Republic had already normalized the idea of rapidly replaceable soldiers. The treatment of clones after Order 66 was consistent with their legal status under the Republic. They were classified as property rather than citizens, a distinction implied by Kaminoan contractual language and reinforced in the Clone Wars. This classification made it legally straightforward for the Empire to retire or repurpose them without public scrutiny. The Republic's legal framework had already removed clones from the sphere of individual rights. Evidence from the Bad Batch indicates that some clones attempted to resist decommissioning, but lacked institutional support. Their appeals to Imperial officials reveal that no mechanisms existed for recognition of service or protection from exploitation. This deficiency began under the Republic, which created no military advocacy structures for its engineered soldiers. The Empire's decision to adopt stormtroopers reflects a shift toward ideological conformity rather than a condemnation of clone performance. Stormtroopers were easier to indoctrinate, cheaper to produce, and politically aligned with Imperial long-term goals. Clones, by contrast, embodied the Republic-era model of professionalized military units with distinctive cultures, making them incompatible with Imperial centralization. Palpatine's manipulation of the clone program relied on vulnerabilities already embedded in the Republic's design. He did not need to alter the clones' biology or modify their training. The system was already optimized for control. The inhibitor chips, accelerated aging, and behavioral conditioning provided a framework that Palpatine merely activated through Order 66. The decline of Kamino following Imperial occupation demonstrates the disposability inherent in the clone production model. Once the Empire no longer required new clones, Kamino and expertise ceased to hold strategic value. This outcome illustrates that the Republic's dependence on external cloning contractors created a military system that could be dismantled rapidly and without accountability. Ultimately, the fate of the clone army reflects the structural limitations of a force engineered without long-term viability. Their accelerated aging, dependence on Kaminoan facilities, genetically programmed obedience, and lack of political rights ensured that their relevance would end with the war. These conditions were not imposed by the Empire but established under the Republic's initial contract. The clones were therefore doomed not by the authoritarian policies of the empire, but by the Republic's decision to create a military force optimized for short-term utility rather than sustained existence. Their fate was predetermined by the biological, legal, and logistical constraints embedded at the moment of their creation, making their eventual disappearance a direct consequence of the Republic's foundational choices.
Thank you for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that share button. My main channel is Critical Analysis Hub, where I post Star Wars content about the movies. My secondary channel is Critical Analysis Hub Plus, where I focus on the shows of Star Wars. And my third channel is Critical Analysis Hub XP, where I post comic books. Be sure to take a moment and check them out. Thanks, and may the Force be with you.